Yeah, good to see you, Brian. We didn't have you last time.
Yeah, I still got the cough, so it's not.
Yeah, right. Come on over. Yeah. You could have.
But yes,
Never know.
I'm much better than I was a month ago.
So good evening, everyone, and on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning, and Appeals, we'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, March the 12th, at approximately 7 p.m. We have a quorum of members, and at this time, I'd like to ask our Director of Community Development, Mr. Brian Simmons, to please call the roll.
Williams,
Present.
Pippin, Graziano,
Here.
O'Laughlin, Kretschmer,
Here.
Jasper,
Here.
Corey.
Here. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, would you rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everyone. So, gentlemen, before we get into the first case, I just want to double check with all of you that you have your packets and you've reviewed the meeting minutes. I think everybody has them here at the dais. And the way we've been doing this, gentlemen, is that I'm going to ask just general consensus on the three, but I'll call them individually. That seems to be our past pattern and practice of recent days. So the chair on a general consensus voice vote will ask for approval of the meeting minutes dated 12/12/19. This was approval of a preliminary plan development and plat for subdivision. It is ZPA case 10001. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the second set of meeting minutes is also on 12/12/19. This is ZPA's case 10002 for 600 Fox Lake Trails, variance to reduce front yard setback. And Chair will seek general consent. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And finally, we have the last case, gentlemen, which is dated 2/13/20, Unified Development Ordinance Text Amendments. This would be ZPA case 01002. Again, on general consent in a voice vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. At this time, I will call Village Case ZPA 02001. The petitioner is, in fact, Cary United Methodist Church. It is for a conditional use for an electronic message center monument sign. The location is 500 North First Street. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Simmons for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, this is a request for a new monument sign for the Cary United Methodist Church. They're looking to replace two existing signs on the property with a new sign that would include a electronic message center. Just a brief overview. The property is zoned R2A, single family. In this district, there are conditional uses required for electronic message center signs. The request for discussion this evening would be village board final. So this would be a recommendation to the village board from the ZPA. Background, the property was annexed into the village of Cary back in the 1960s. The church was originally constructed on the property. In 2008, the property received approval for conditional use for a detached garage. And over the years has installed or received permits to install three monument signs back in 1977, 85, and then also 2000. All those signs were installed prior to our current sign regulations, so they were permitted by right at that time, but now they are considered legal non-conforming as they don't comply with current regulations. These are slide just shows an example where the three signs are located at. There's two that are on either side of the driveway that access the property, and then a third which is further to the south along the frontage of First Street. The petitioner is proposing again to replace the first two, which you can see in the slide, that are closest to the driveway with the new sign that would be installed perpendicular to the roadway, similar to sign number 3. As you can see in the lower right-hand portion of the slide, that's the image of what excuse me, the sign would look like. That'd be 64 square feet total in area, with 24 square feet or 38% of the sign face would be utilized for the EMC portion of the sign. Within the Unified Development Ordinance, there are specific regulations for electronic message centers. Specifically, you can see the regulations on the right-hand portion of the slide. They require conditional use approval. They're only permitted on monument signs. The EMC portion of the sign cannot exceed 40% of the allowed sign area. This sign would comply with that from the maximum 38%. All messages would need to be static in nature, could not have motion or other things that would signify or simulate motion. Has maximum minimum illumination levels, so at nighttime it would automatically dim for lighting conditions. And those are all conditions that would be proposed as part of this sign, should it be recommended for approval as well. As with all regulations within the village, there are various standards that the sign would need to meet for conditional use, which are summarized in the slide. The use would not be substantially diminish or impair values of property within the immediate area, not impede normal orderly development of surrounding property, or contribute to an overburdening of municipal services. Petitioner did provide some information as far as they believe that it complies with these standards, and could provide additional information to that effect as well, if there's questions from that standpoint. So this evening, should the ZPA determine that the petition complies with those standards, have been met in this case, is recommended that the ZPA would recommend approval of a motion of a conditional use to the village board for an electronic message center sign for the property located at 500 North First Street, subject to the conditions that are listed in your staff report. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. Well done. Gentlemen, questions for Mr. Simmons? Fairly straightforward. So, Mr. Heiser, did you have any additional comments you'd like to offer regarding the petition?
I do not. I'm looking forward to your approval.
All right. Gentlemen, questions for the petitioner? So, Mr. Heiser, I'm well aware of where you are, and we've been here now in the community for about 17 years. I'm just more curious than anything else what your motivation is for this particular type of sign, since most in the community would know where your institution is.
Well, it's twofold. One is to eliminate.
Mr. Heiser, could I ask, and could you just state your name and address for the record, please?
Richard Heiser. I'm Chairman of Board of Trustees at the Cary United Methodist Church.
Thank you.
I reside at 8404 William, unincorporated McHenry.
Thank you.
Basically it's twofold. Number one is we have long had a monument sign out there that is parallel to the road and is a little extremely hard to read when you're doing 35 miles an hour, which I assume they all are. We propose to make it perpendicular. One of the reasons we haven't in the past was financial. A lady passed away recently. We got a significant amount of money, enough to pay for this sign, and we proceeded to do that. I don't know what else to say. We're very proud of our church. We've been pretty good neighbors of everyone here in the community, and we just celebrated our 47th anniversary with our preschool.
Well
We had a party last night, or not last night, but this week, and recognized Ruth Barrett for having started that. So we're pretty proud of our contribution to this village and look forward to continued service. And we're sort of keeping up with the Joneses, since our Catholic friends across the street and the Lutheran friends up the street have got it. But that's not the real reason.
Thank you, Mr.
But I'd
Heiser.
be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. While you're standing there, let me just double check with the gentleman if there's any other
Yeah,
questions.
this obviously is going to be changeable message. It'll be, sign up for our school. We got this bake sale going on, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm just going to say, that's one thing I've been looking forward to. Those 4x4 painted signs are all my responsibility. Not just painting them, but installing them, see if they get down, and getting our permission to put them up. So I'm going to be gaining a great deal of satisfaction of giving this over to somebody else just to hit the keyboard and do the same thing. So I do recognize, based on discussions with Brian, that we are limited on timing and that sort of stuff. And if I didn't see anything up there, but there's a percentage of public use that's obligated for that, and we're,
Yeah, we generally work with property owners if
I
we
don't
need
remember
to.
it's 40 or 50% has to be available at least, but we certainly agree to that too.
Very good. Mr. Graziano, other
That's all I
questions?
got.
Gentlemen? No, good. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Heiser. And just so you're aware, one of the things that we do as part of our protocol is that we ask if there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak, and obviously there's no one here, but that is part of the process. So I'm going to open and close the public portion of the meeting. Gentlemen, before I call the motion, are there any questions that you may have that we haven't addressed yet?
A curiosity, out of the electronic signs within the village, how many of them are out of standard because they were, pre-built to the standard or got conditional use approval?
As far as compliance from the use of them, we have been trying to address that with several signs in the community. There are a few that still are not compliant as far as how frequently their messages change or have motion within them. But for the most part, we've been doing a informative or educational enforcement is how I refer to it, where we've been advising the property owners, these are our code requirements, trying to get them in compliance by a certain date, and then following up with letters afterwards. At the start of that process, we had probably 75 to 80% of them were not compliant. Now there's probably 2 or 3 that are not compliant, but pending other changes to the code that this board reviewed last month, that still has to be considered by the village board for timing changes. Once that gets approved, majority of them will be compliant, and we're just going to clean up some operations. But for the most part, there's 1 or 2 that don't fully comply right now.
So, Mr. Simmons, I have a question, and Mr. Heiser, don't take this the wrong way. This is a new process for us, for the record. This is a little bit new. But do we have any rules around what can go on there? I know there's First Amendment rights, but do we have any things that we say unequivocally can't be put on signs in terms of the content?
No, we cannot regulate content of the sign, so that's federally mandated. What we can do is, or what we do regulate is the operation or the use of them. So that's where you cannot have flashing, motion, things like that on the message, so that it's distracting to individuals that go past it. But as far as what is displayed on the sign, as far as pictures or text, we cannot regulate that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons.
It's a church.
I get it, Jim. I'm trying to understand the rules of the road here. Yeah.
Well, we just had a rummage sale, so I guess that could be described.
Hey, it's some nice stuff there, too.
All right, gentlemen.
I got one question
please,
for Mr.
Grosvenor.
Simmons.
Sure, please.
As I read through your suggested conditions, seems to me that like 5 out of the 7 are already contained in the ordinance. Why do those have to be listed as conditions?
Yeah, it's just best practice to have it within the ordinance, because the petitioner will have to sign off on the conditions of approval, should this be approved, so that they would reiterate at that point that they would comply with those regulations.
Okay, just seems redundant to me.
It is, yeah. It's
All right, so before I call the motion, gentlemen, any last kick at the can here? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve a conditional use for an electronic message center sign for the property located at 500 North First Street, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Simmons, would you call the roll?
Sure. Williams,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
Kretschmer,
Yes.
Jasper,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. So, Mr. Heiser, you have a formal yes recommendation, and you may have heard Mr. Simmons talk in the front end of this, is that this is a little bit new. But now I think you just work with Mr. Simmons, and this ball is now rolling. So we'll wish you continued success. Yeah, yeah, and hopefully you won't be out there doing more painting. Yeah, 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 amen to that.
You might have to touch up the preschool sign once in a while.
Well, yeah, as I said, it's been up there 47 years, and that's why I asked Mr. Simmons if that could remain, because we're pretty proud of that. It's probably the first preschool in town.
Yeah.
And, well, I'll leave it at that. Although I do have we've already approved it, so maybe I should just say it again, but I still don't understand the spatial use when we were first ones there, and then they zoned it all residential around us. Why we are special use? Looks like they're the special use for our area.
Yeah, so,
I never have understood that, but I need to come and get.
Well, you're at the
Yeah,
right
it's-
place to address this.
Yeah.
For our
For the-
storage building out there.
for the signs specifically, that these signs, no matter what property they're proposed on, they require it. The detached garage at the same issue, those required special use in the zoning district as well.
Well, for residential area though, right?
Correct.
Okay.
But yeah, so your church use was established on the property previously, although under our codes, churches require specific approvals. So if they're conditional use for that church, if you expand that use, it requires an amendment to the conditional use. This is nothing related to your use.
I'm an engineer, so.
Yeah, I understand.
Like I said, I should have been quiet.
No, you're fine. But from a scheduling standpoint, you'll be scheduled for the April 7th village board is when this will go for them for consideration.
Subject to approval now, I need to get a building permit after the village board approval.
Correct. We will can issue a building permit after the village board approves it. But you can apply beforehand if you want.
Coming up to install, and I didn't know if I could apply for that or if they had to apply for it.
Yeah, you can certainly submit an application. We can review it in our department. We won't be able to issue the permit until after the
So I
village board.
could prepare it now, subject to approval for the village board. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Heiser, just so we're being transparent with you, and I don't want to overstep here with Mr. Simmons, because I think he actually knows this process a little bit better than I do, but when it gets to the village board, because it's all of us here voting in the affirmative, it gets put on the consent agenda. So what that really means is that barring some calamity, it's going to get approved. You're not going to be asked to speak about it again, to the best of my knowledge.
Oh,
So that's the good
I'll
news.
prepare too if I need to,
Yeah.
but, I understand that process.
Yeah.
and, It still has to have another approval process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I don't think there's necessarily going to be a public vote on, unless you hear otherwise, it's going to get approved on the 7th. So that's the good news.
Great.
Okay. So gentlemen, I think the other thing we probably do need to review, and I want to say thank you to all of you for making sure that we got here tonight, because I know there was a lot of back and forth about who could be here tonight and the time of 7 o'clock. Mr. Simmons was telling me recently that he does think a petition is coming up for next month, perhaps, and maybe you want to give a high level on that one, Mr. Simmons?
There may be one or two petitions coming in. We have one resident who's looking for variance for an accessory structure that may submit here shortly, so that may be scheduled for in April. And I do have a application that was submitted for a cannabis craft grower, which is, they're still finalizing the documentation, so that may be scheduled for April or may still go in May. So that are two cases that are pending right now that will either be next month or the following month, pending location of meetings.
Do you know,
Things go
Mr. Simmons, with regard to the latter request, I did read recently that one of the surrounding communities took a position about how many they would allow in their community.
Yeah, our board has not, as far as the quantity of establishments that there will be. There is requirements within the code that was adopted that mirrors the state, that there's separation requirements among similar uses. So if we were to have a use come into the community, that would limit this particular park that the petitioner is looking at from another use going in there. That would be the same type of use. It would, and only other portion of the village would be permissible for the use. So in that regards, with the separation requirements for the types of uses, it limits the ability for a second use or a third use to come into the community.
And would it be appropriate to help the ZPA members know where generally this is being proposed this evening?
It's still, the application is still being assembled, so I don't want to give out too much information at this point, but certainly it's something that will be in the pipeline, and more information will come out once I do have it.
All right. So gentlemen, that was kind of the comment that I had for yourself. So there are some meetings coming up for your own personal planning. I think we have said publicly that it's going to be that second Tuesday of each month. That seems to be kind of our general guideline right now, and we'll adjust accordingly. But that meeting would take place at 7 o'clock as opposed to 7:30. That's our new time. So I want to say thank you, those that come up from the city to make it here. So thank you. And before I close, did anyone else have anything else that they wanted to address?
Nope.
All right, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.